are live.
Hello everybody, and it's lovely to see so many people joining us online for this first virtual Crawley Question Time. This is the first time that I've done this particular gig virtually, and it's a great pleasure to be here, particularly as I remember almost exactly a year ago when this was the final live event that I actually did before lockdown. And we all sat there in Croydon College and we talked about the way in which there was going to be such great collaboration. And we talked about the way in which the community was going to come together along with all the representatives to support those who would be impacted by COVID-19. At the time, it was our understanding that it would be all over by the summer. And sadly, that did not turn out to be the case. We've also now learnt the true impact of COVID-19 on this particular town, which has been disproportionately affected, mainly because of its close connections with Gatwick. So I have a genuine hope that the vaccine means that it will now all be over by this summer. But in the meantime, I am acutely aware that a massive proportion of the working population, something like 40%, have been affected by furlough. And it's a real disappointment to me. I grew up in this area. When I grew up, Crawley was this vibrant place where all my friends came to shop and it was their place to work. This is what people came to Crawley to do. They came here to make their lives. They came to have all their leisure interests and they came for employment. But I do know that Crawley is extremely resilient. I also know that it's better placed than most for recovery, partly because it has this great community spirit, but also because it's got an educated workforce and it's got a lot of companies in high growth sectors who will hopefully help us grow out of this as much as we need the aviation industry to support us as well. So I'm going to turn to my panel today and ask them to each introduce themselves. They're here to answer your questions, so please keep feeding those questions in and I will put them to the panel. I'm hoping we have time to get through all the questions, but I know we've already had some. So if I don't get to your question today, I'm very sorry, but we will find a way of making sure they are all answered in due course so that everybody does get a response to anything that comes in. So please can I now welcome my panel. So please can I start with Councillor Peter Lam, our leader. Peter, please introduce yourself.
Councillor Peter Lam, I'm the leader of Crawley Borough Council and I represent the Northgate and West Green ward on the council, and ultimately my role is ensuring that everything more or less works, or at least hopefully does.
Thank you very much, Peter. Can I turn now to Duncan? Councillor Duncan Crowe, our leader of the opposition. Hello Duncan, please can you introduce yourself?
Good evening, I'm Councillor Duncan Crowe. I represent Furness Green on Crawley Borough Council and Tilgate and Furness Green on West Sussex County Council. As you've just mentioned, I'm the leader of the opposition here at Crawley Borough, and at West Sussex County Council I'm the Cabinet Member for Fire and Rescue and Communities.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Can I now turn to Councillor Peter Smith, who is our Cabinet Member for Planning and Economic Development, which is clearly going to be quite a hot topic this evening. Councillor Smith, please will you introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening everybody. Councillor Peter Smith, I represent Ifield and Ifield West, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Planning and Economic Development, which I've been for the last 8 years, and I'm also the Deputy Leader of the Council.
Thank you very much. Can I turn now to Councillor Bob Lanza, our Cabinet Member for Economy and Corporate Services at West Sussex County Council.
Yeah, thank you very much and good evening everyone. I'm a member of Crawley Borough Council for the Pound Hill South and Worth ward and also West Sussex County Council for the Maiden Bower and Worth division. And as mentioned, I'm the Cabinet Member for Economy and Corporate Resources.
Thank you very much. Dr. Laura Hill, please will you introduce yourself? You are our Clinical Chair for NHS West Sussex.
So good evening everybody, my name is Dr. Laura Hill. I'm a GP locally in Crawley and I have been for many years, so I know that our patch very well and our town very well. I am also the Clinical Chair for NHS West Sussex CCG. That's the local health body which has a number of statutory responsibilities, delivering services that you would recognise in general practice and your local hospitals. It's really good to be here again.
Thank you very much, Laura. That leads me on nicely to Pennie, Dr. Pennie Ford, who is the Executive Managing Director of NHS West Sussex CCG.
Good evening, it's lovely to be here again. My name's Pennie Ford. I'm the Executive Managing Director for NHS West Sussex CCG. Laura's just described the body that's responsible for commissioning the services, the health services for the population of West Sussex, working very much in conjunction with colleagues across Brighton and Hove Clinical Commissioning Group and East Sussex Clinical Commissioning Group.
Thank you very much. At least turns me to Inspector Steve Turner, who is here from Sussex Police.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Inspector Steve Turner from the Neighbourhood Policing Team within the Crawley area of responsibility.
Thanks very much. And our representative for the youth sector this evening is our Crawley Youth Mayor, Leon Mukazi. Leon, please will you introduce yourself and let us know what you're particularly interested in for this evening.
Thank you. My name is Leon Mukazi. I'm the current Youth Mayor of Crawley. I also work alongside the Crawley Young Persons Council. I work with the youth and young people and give them a platform, helping them with different initiatives that they have as well.
Thank you very much, Leon. Right, I'm hoping those questions are going to appear fairly soon. In the meantime, I'll just ask one to get us going, which is to talk about, I'm going to start with actually climate change because it's quite a positive topic at the moment, and we've all been aware that there has been actually a slightly positive impact on climate change from the amount of homeworking that we are all doing and indeed are doing this evening. So Crawley has pledged to reduce carbon by 45% by 2030. And I would be very grateful if, I'm going to start with Peter Lam actually. Peter Lam, if you would like to come on and say, how do you feel COVID-19 has impacted plans and how do you think the council is going to pick that up going forward?
Thank you. Well, I think it certainly has highlighted just how high the level of emissions are coming from transport. We don't measure on a day-to-day basis CO2. In fact, we don't really measure CO2 much at all in the local area. It's not really possible to do that, but we do monitor the air quality in the town. We have devices near to the lampposts which keep track of that, and we know that Crawley is an area in which we have very poor air quality, largely as a result of the means of transportation and the level of transport use we have in the town. And certainly it's highlighted the impact that having more people working from home and fewer vehicle movements has. Now, ultimately, if we're going to get people back to work, then you're going to see vehicle movements, or at least people's transport needs, increase over time. And that's why we're trying with our strategies around trying to invest more in cycling provision, trying to invest more in pedestrian or making it easier for people to walk from A to B, and trying to invest more in sustainable transport to get more people out of their cars and out walking again, or cycling, or on public transport, which will hopefully help contribute to that. But ultimately, there is going to be a very significant, shift in the way we approach how we get from A to B if we are going to tackle this. Even electric vehicles don't resolve it. There's a large part of energy production that still has to be tackled there, and also there's an awful lot of pollutants that come out of just having tyres, even if it's an electric vehicle. Now, I'm a big believer that we can use hydrogen and things like that to try and improve reduce the level of carbon emissions that are coming out from our vehicles, but there's still big challenges, and ultimately the simplest thing that any of us can do is just monitor our own behaviour and try and do a bit more where we can to use less carbon-based fuels.
Thank you very much, Peter. Would anybody else like to come in on that particular issue before we start moving to the questions which are coming in? Somebody give me a wave. Robert, please will you come in and just let us have your view on this, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. And well, really, from a West Sussex County Council perspective, similar to Crawley Borough, we have a climate change strategy running from 2020 to 2030, and our aim is to be carbon neutral, so zero carbon, in terms of our activities as a county council. And as part of that, we have a carbon management plan. I mean, I agree with the observations from Councillor Lam. I think that the COVID pandemic has highlighted just how much air pollution there is, and also to some extent how many unnecessary journeys we might have been making as part of our everyday lives. So in that sense, although it's been a real crisis from a climate change perspective, it's been quite educational. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Duncan, would you like to come in? Was that a wave at me? It was lovely. Come on in and have a join
yes, thank you very much. Yes, climate change and carbon reduction is something that there is a broad consensus amongst the main political parties, though there can sometimes be differences in sort of in different aspects of it. Nationally, we've reduced CO2 emissions by around 30% over the last decade. The UK has a very proud performance on carbon reduction, and indeed the government, and indeed governments of all persuasions, certainly across Europe and increasingly across the world, are signed up to reducing carbon. So it is something which it is quite positive. But of course, what we're doing is we are limiting the impact. There is going to be significant climate change as a result of what's already been released, and all we can do now is to sort of mitigate the further increases in CO2 and try to limit temperature rise to a manageable level. But it is quite a finely balanced act. But certainly in terms of the last year and COVID, yes, there are things we can learn from how we've lived over this last year, and how we can apply that in how we operate as a council, but also how we operate in our everyday lives as well. There's definitely going to be some learning points. Now, I do think when lockdown is released, that people will want to travel somewhat, because they've been somewhat restricted over the last year. And of course, we hope very much that people will travel from Gatwick, of course, because I'm sure we're going to talk about that later. But you know, sometimes these things are coming in from different angles. You know, we all want to reduce carbon, but we all want to support our economy as well. And aviation can sometimes be a little bit controversial when it comes to climate change. But Crawley as a town, of course, it is heavily dependent on Gatwick, so we'll probably come to that later. So sorry to conflate the two issues, but we certainly have made a lot of progress, and but there's definitely more to do.
Now, I think it's a very positive thing. I was chairing a conference fairly recently, and there was a lot of discussion about how aviation could become greener in the future, and a lot of the technical innovation, particularly around the use of fuels, in which I believe UK is a leader. So we will hopefully be leading the way in terms of improving our carbon footprint for aviation once we are released and able to travel again. Robert, did you want to come back? No, it was Peter. I'm very sorry. I was looking in the wrong box. That's what happens when we're in boxes. Peter, would you like to come on in?
Please don't mix this up, Chair. Thank you very much. Yes, as Councillor Peter Lam says, that it's actually, climate change is something that actually starts with us as individuals. We've passed a climate change emergency motion at the council to take urgent action to try and deal with it. And we've got plans in our Crawley Growth Programme to do things like improve bus services. Metrobus are going to convert their bus fleet to hydrogen power. We're planning to improve walking and cycle routes, bus stops, but ultimately we all have to look inwards ourselves to see, is it really necessary to drive the kids to school? Can we walk? Do we need actually to drive on a Sunday morning to the local shops to get the paper? And I think COVID has started to open some of our eyes on that, where we see people walking around the neighbourhood. I've been chatting to all sorts of people I've never ever met, because usually we just fly past each other on other sides of the road. So I think it's probably more important than COVID pandemic and the economic recovery, actually. And we're trying to build climate change remedies into everything we do as the administration. And I think that's the right way to go. There is no Planet 2. There is no option of stand still or business as usual. Everything needs to be reviewed and improved and changed.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to bring Leon in on this one, because I sense that his is of the generation that is going to inherit some of these challenges. And I wondered if you had a view, Leon, if I turn to you in just a moment, about how you think we should be trying to change things to make us more aware of our carbon footprint as we go into what I'm now going to call the new normal, because that has become the buzzword?
Thank you. I think that climate change is an issue that we all see and we all experience in our day-to-day lives, and it's something that if we don't tackle now will cause a detriment in our futures as well. As a young person, I'm only 18 years old. I've got a whole life ahead of me, and I don't know what that's going to look like if climate change continues to happen. And I feel like to tackle that, it starts from us. And there's lots of small changes that we can make, because it's all good saying that these big corporations, which should be changing, to ask them to change or, you know, to take action on that front. But it starts with us as well. And there's a lot of small things that we can do. As Peter was saying, we can walk instead of take our cars to go and get the paper. We can do lots of small things which will add up. And I think that initiative has to start from us. So, yeah.
Thank you. Good answer. I am going to now start with the first question. So we're going to move on to something a little more interesting and controversial now. So my first question is from Paul Taylor-Burr from Southgate. And he says, if after the local elections, there is a new party in control, will they continue with the rebuilding plans to aid Crawley's recovery? Or will we see a complete dissemination of those plans in favour of even harsher cuts to our services? Now, that's an interesting question, because we're coming off on that, and not too surprisingly, I think the first person I need to turn to for this will be Duncan. So, Duncan, would you very kindly give the answer to Paul?
Yes, and thank you. Just for everyone's benefit, the questionnaire is actually a Liberal Democrat candidate in the upcoming elections. So just to make that clear to everybody. And yes, I think realistically, I'm the right person to ask this question, because although in theory, you know, other parties could win seats, because only a third of the council is up for election. No new party could win more than the well, it'll be 13 seats that will be coming up. So therefore, if there is a change of, well, we currently have no overall control, and we have a confidence and supply arrangement between the two main parties to have got us through this very difficult COVID year for Crawley, because we thought it was important to put differences aside and work together for the town, rather than have a political power struggle that was being Crawley's sort of almost darkest hour in modern times. So we're currently no overall control. So effectively, actually, it could in theory be a change, of course, if there's a Labour majority administration. Of course, it would still be a Labour administration and leader that we have now. If there's a change and there's a Conservative administration, well, the obvious answer is, of course, we will continue to support Crawley and to do everything possible to support the residents of this town. The idea that we would not is ludicrous, to be quite frank. We do recognise, I think we all recognise, that there are budget pressures, and both parties have worked together very sensibly on this year's budget. There have been some difficult decisions, and no doubt there'll be some difficult decisions next year. But for next year's budget, I would argue that actually, whoever's in control of the council, it will be somewhat easier for that administration, because we have done such good work this year and laid the foundations to ensure that the council remains on a sound financial footing. And for me, that's the most important, because once we lose control of our finances, then we're not able to do the things that we'd like to be able to do. So it's important that council is run on a sustainable footing and that we can continue to provide services. So the direct answer to the questioner is that no, there would not be a noticeable change in the amount of support given to Crawley. We're all committed, you know, sure to speak for both parties here, that we want to do our utmost for the town and to support Crawley. And the idea that we have any sort of ideological wish to slash services is, quite frankly, for the birds. It's just not going to happen. We will do whatever, we will put ideology aside and do what is right for Crawley.
Thanks very much. It's good to hear that there is cross-party support here, and that your plans are going forward in that vein in order to achieve the best outcome for the town. I think that's a very positive way forward. I am aware that there was a budget consultation, and I am expecting there to be some questions on that going forward, which I'm sure will apply to everybody on here. Moving on, I have my next question, which is an anonymous question, so I'm afraid I can't tell you which ward this is from, but the Community Safety Survey has just finished. and there has been quite a lot of publicity recently about Crawley. I admit that I initially trained as a journalist in Crawley, and my memory was that the perception of crime was always slightly higher than the actuality. But what is the police's perception of fear of crime and safety at the moment, and particularly given the current press activity? Steve, I'm going to turn to you for this one, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. I think it's starting by saying, yes, very much aware of what the national picture looks like in this current time in recent weeks. And I'll be careful what to say to not jeopardise a live criminal investigation, but my thoughts are very much with the victim family and their friends at this time with that incident. That's obviously impacted on not just those local communities and those affected, but also on the police and family. You know, I will comment and say we're utterly devastated to kind of see this horrific incident portrayed. While that's going on, obviously we are monitoring local tensions. I think it's fair to say that that's had an impact across nationally and local. That continues to be monitored. You're absolutely right in your earlier point around the perception of crime is often far higher than the actual crime rates would state. Currently, in the current pandemic and with lockdown, crime overall has reduced in the Crawley area, and the data shows that. But that's not to say that we rest on our laurels there. We know that we've got the pandemic that's assisted us, but equally, you know, it's important for us to make sure that people do feel safe. You know, part of our priorities isn't just the case of understanding where crime's affecting people, it's making them feel safe when they don't feel safe. So we do have PCSOs now in each of the electoral areas, which I think was an update from the last meeting. We're making sure that those PCSOs are well connected to the key stakeholders in the area. They're visible, they're submitted intelligence, they're updating people by different technologies, as well as obviously being visible to tell people what we're doing and where we are. And I believe in the last week we've got a new force engagement model that's gone out, and this engagement model is different to what we've seen before, and it effectively comes from ground grassroots level up in terms of listening to the public, finding out, you know, what their fears are and their perceptions, and how we engage in partnership to respond to that and make people feel safe.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on now to the topic of leisure. I have a very specific question from somebody who hasn't actually identified himself by name, but he is the chairman of Three Bridges Football Club, so I assume that somebody out there does know what his name is. And he says, good evening. We can all understand that sport can and does help ease the mental health issues of younger people. So could somebody please explain what are the plans going forward to increase sport and well-being in Crawley? He says he's surprised at how little the town, how few football facilities the town has, although he's a bit worried he might just be uninformed. I know I have a teenage son, and the biggest challenge has been the loss of outdoor sport and that level of mental health that keeping fit and healthy in team sport gives you at whatever level. So I am hoping that I get a wave from somebody to bring in here. Peter, would you like to come in on this one? Because this is clearly an impact, and clearly there's a balance to be had between budget and making sure that we can give people the facilities they require. Peter, over to you.
Crawley is blessed with actually having some of the best football facilities of any town of our size. It's largely as a result of the design of the new town that we have vast amounts of playing field space that is made available, that is available for hire on a regular basis. You know, I've been doing enough of these for the last 9 years or so, I think, of question time events like these. People will often talk down the town's facilities, but it's never based on actually comparing it with anywhere else. It's based against what people might like to be the case. And, you know, there are always more things that we can do more, and we're going to continue to do them. Certainly there's money called Section 106, which is money that you get from any new building that's taking place in an area. And as part of that, we get a certain amount of money that can go towards leisure facilities, because the idea is if you're putting new housing in a place, there's going to be more people moving into that place, so you need more investment in facilities. And there is a fairly substantial amount of Section 106 available for improving leisure facilities, which we're discussing at the moment exactly what to do with in terms of improving sporting facilities in the town. But some of that does potentially relate to tackling flooding at some of the current sports fields to bring them into far greater usage than we're currently getting. But I'd say there is quite a lot going on, and we do try and encourage more through the town's contracts with organisations like Everyone Active at K2 and through the town's wellbeing team to get people more active. But ultimately, if people want to do something, then there is actually a community responsibility on people's part to step up and participate in that. We can't make kids do anything that they don't necessarily want to do. All we can do is provide decent facilities and hope that people are willing to get out there and get a bit of fresh air.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask if there's any challenge there in terms of budget, because I am aware that there has been a consultation about trying to keep some of these outdoor facilities open. How do you balance that requirement to keep as much outdoor playgrounds and leisure facilities as possible against the requirement to reduce carbon? I did read somewhere that K2 swimming pool's temperature was one of your biggest contributors, which I thought was surprising. So is that a really difficult challenge for the authority?
Just to be clear, in terms of the budget consultation, the discussion there was around what's called fine field sort of provisions. So that would affect some of the cricket sort of pitches and things like that, and potentially that the bowls and other equipment of that nature. However, there was a decision taken not to go forward with any cuts to that set. So all of this has been done and buried like two months ago now. So there's no reduction there, but certainly in terms of football, there was no discussion around doing anything like that. There hasn't been a final decision around the swimming pool. Ultimately, you do have to balance usage and whether or not it's practical to do some of these things. Certainly, there's no point having a pool that is too cold for anyone to use, but it is possible to have things generating a certain amount of carbon if you're offsetting them, and there are a range of ways councils can offset some of those emissions. So it's got to be taken in the round. Certainly, no one's looking to make people stop using facilities. It's how we can take steps that will make those things carbon neutral in the future.
Thank you very much. Duncan, I can see you'd like to come in on this one next. So what's your view on this?
Well, thank you. And I was at one time the council's cabinet member for leisure and culture. So I speak with a little bit of experience. And Peter is right that we do have some excellent facilities in Crawley, arguably better than towns of a comparable size. And not just, you can't go to any neighbourhood really without noticing a football pitch and people playing. But we also have multi-use games areas. We also have outdoor tennis courts. We have a absolutely fantastic leisure centre in K2 on the A23 in Tilgate. So we have brilliant facilities, but it has been a challenge in the past. We've had a strange situation in the past where we've had such good facilities, but the uptake of regular exercise and sporting activities amongst the population has been lower than average. But that is something that has changed, and that's really good and positive to see, because from the pub we do have health inequalities in Crawley, and trying to address those through but not only diet but also specifically through exercise and facilities to exercise and sports is something that the council does play its role in, and I think we've done very, very well over the years, and certainly we will seek to continue to do so.
Thank you very much. Well, there we go. I've got a very direct response here. I've got a Macintosh. I don't know if it's a Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. which says, any chance of getting cycle shelters, that's a difficult phrase, tongue twister, cycle shelters in Milton Mount Flats? Now, I'm hoping that the relevant person will wave at me to say, because I'm sure we've got some passionate cycling supporters here. Anybody like to take on board the Milton Mount Flats cycling shelters issue? Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I can't commit today, but it's certainly possible. The Section 106 money I talked about before also has funding available for cycling improvements, which includes installing money for finding bike shelters in places. I would have thought there might be some nearby around the corner in terms of public use for the park. If you're talking about having it incorporated into the building itself, it becomes more tricky, because anything which involves changing the fabric of the building means that anyone who owns any of the properties in the building has to pay towards that. It can't just be done for free, because if it was being done that way, it'd be done under the Crawley Homes budget, which has to be used for Crawley Homes tenants. So to pay their part of it, but wouldn't cover the full cost. So bearing in mind all the works that have just been taking place there of late, it may well be that people aren't necessarily in the mood for another bill, but it depends what type of shelter we're talking about. If you're looking for secure storage, then I think the answer is probably going to be, will residents be willing to chip in when it comes to providing it?
Thank you very much. I'm aware that mental health and the way in which sport and using cycling has been really a key element of the way in which the pandemic has impacted on our community. So I would like to turn actually to some of our representatives here from the CCG about what else can be done to support people's well-being, mental well-being during this time. Pennie, would you like to come and sort of say what it is that you think we can do to help people stay fit and healthy, both mentally and physically, at this time, and hopefully going forward as we ease lockdown?
Thank you. I'll start, and Laura, as a clinician, I'm not a clinician, and Laura's clinician may want to join in as well, but absolutely, we really recognise that the pandemic has had a significant impact on many people's mental health and sense of well-being, in not only, but in particular for a lot of our young people for whom it's been really difficult not being able to socialise in the way that they normally would in or out of school, and a restriction in terms of kind of physical activity. And we know that's so important for people's health, but it's so important as people are kind of growing and needing to have that kind of space to exercise as well as to kind of study and learn. So we have seen a significant impact. We have sadly seen a significant rise in people coming forward and approaching the health services with various levels of mental distress, and we're taking a lot of action to try and support those people through our more specialist health services. But it's absolutely a critical part of what we're doing, and working with our communities to see how we can encourage young people, well, all people actually, but young people to get out into the fresh air, to take exercise, hopefully as some of our facilities and our sports facilities open back up again, to go back into some of those kind of groups and those activities as soon as possible. So we work quite closely with our local partners in Crawley Borough. I think that's really developed. You spoke at the beginning about our intent to work collaboratively. I think that's really shone through in some of the work that we've done in Crawley, and we're developing local community networks to work more closely between our GP practices, our voluntary and community sector, and our sort of district and our borough council partners. So that's kind of a flavour of it, but Laura might want to say more from a kind of mental health perspective.
Laura, would you like to come in and add anything from this perspective? After that, I'm actually going to ask Leon for his views. So Laura, would you like to come in next?
Thanks very much. This is a really welcome conversation. Getting generally our population, our residents more active and more engaged with their well-being is really important. One of the most significant changes I've seen in my consultations in our practice in Southgate, and it has been mirrored across colleagues' practices across town, is the volume of distress that people have suffered. For various reasons, all of the things we can think about in terms of economic and financial pressures, the pressure of furlough, homeschooling, and the stress of the pandemic, and loved ones being affected by it. So probably I would have seen maybe 10% of people in any one surgery being emotionally distressed or depressed or stressed. I would say that's at least doubled over the last few months. One of the biggest jewels in our crown, I think, in Crawley is the ability to be able to help people access services across our town, both through the voluntary and community sector and through our sporting facilities, which help people reconnect and de-stress. One of the most effective ways really to help somebody recover is to get them involved in community and in sports. And if we think about the inequalities that we've seen widen through the COVID pandemic and the burdening pressures around sort of weight issues, development of diabetes, etc., and ill health, this is an area I think really as a community of our council and as the NHS and as residents, we should be coming together just to think a little bit more out the box, what more we can do. Penny's right, we've done lots in the past, and in fact early on in the pandemic, Crawley Football Club and a whole load of students from local colleges came together to help support our ethnic minority communities to access additional advice and information to keep themselves safe and think about COVID, and that was very successful. So it's these sort of community action that we're so good at in Crawley that we need to do more of and think about that going forward.
Thank you very much. As promised, I'm going to come to Leon next, because I was wondering if you had any ideas about what we can do to help young people in particular. I'm aware that there's been a massive impact on the mental health of young people, because it's a key time of their lives when they've effectively been unable to do most of the things from a physical and indeed mental nature, the socialising, the exercise, which is so important to development. So if you had a wish for what could take us forward, what would it be?
Okay, thank you. I want to start off by saying I'm no expert in this field. However, I'm aware that mental health is something that affects a lot of young people, especially right now, where there's a lot of going on. It can be quite daunting thinking about the future as well, with a lot going on. But us as human beings, I would say that one thing we can do, something simple that we can do, is check up on people that we know, whether it's sending them a text, maybe a phone call, because I know a lot of people, especially with online schooling and stuff like that, people are shut in and they may not want to go outside, or maybe they can't even go outside. So just checking up on other people. I know there's a lot of services as well that the NHS offers where you can speak to people about it as well. And yeah, that's all I've got to say really. So just checking up on the people you know, your loved ones, your friends, people you haven't spoke to in a long time as well. It's a time to reconnect with people. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm aware that a lot of schools, and particularly in this area, have got very good at communicating not just with the people that they know, but have had schemes for communicating with people in care homes and things like that, which has been actually a fantastic asset during these times. We're going to move on now back to a more economic question, which is from John Bolton, which is talking about funding for people wishing to start a business during the pandemic. There is always a rise in self-employment and indeed in terms of innovation whenever there are difficult times. In fact, innovation is often born out of necessity, and indeed my own company is a result of the last recession. So there's a very good question here in what funding or incentive is available to help local people wishing to start their own business during this time. I'm going to start this time with Bob Lanza, I think, to say, is there anything available at a sort of county level or a wider level? Because there are a number of organisations across this region that provide business support.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the question. Well, at a national level, I mean, and this existed previously, it is possible to apply for a startup loan for a new business, and there's also prior to the pandemic, the National Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which provides support for the setting up of a new business. And in terms of accessing and understanding all of the possible support available, that is available on our West Sussex website. If you just search on starting up a business, it will take you to our economy pages and give all sorts of sources of support, not just financial, but advice about setting up a new business. And the main observation here is absolutely right. We have seen an increase in business startups, and it's great to see all that entrepreneurial spirit out there of people trying to make good by becoming self-employed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was looking at some data fairly recently, and I discovered that this region, Crawley and slightly beyond it, is actually one of the most resilient regions in terms of the ability for startups to thrive and survive beyond those first few years. It clearly is an area where that entrepreneurial spirit shines through.
May I mention another source I forgot? There's also a programme being operated by Business West Sussex. It's called Recover and Rise, and there's a whole host of webinars which would be useful to somebody wishing to start a business or indeed recover a business. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I would indeed advise anybody out there who's trying to start their own business, look at what's available, because there is an enormous amount of free help, free webinars from a whole range of organisations, and indeed financial support for very productive and innovative ideas that will become the successful businesses of the future and will help drive our recovery. Moving back on to my next question, which is from Rebecca Turville of Pound Hill. So, could the council commit to reducing landfill waste by providing a doorstep composting service? Similar to the current garden waste service, residents could make a financial contribution to the service, or a reduction in landfill waste collection could provide some of the time and finance for this. So that's an interesting question. Could you commit to reducing landfill waste by helping with the composting, with a composting service? Anyone like to come forward and talk to us about this? Duncan, you have your hand up. Would you like to come and start with this one?
Yes, thank you. Actually, the greenest thing to do is to actually compost your garden waste at home, as opposed to having a lorry pick it up and take it somewhere else, or indeed take it somewhere else yourself. But of course, Crawley Borough Council does have its green bin collection waste that was it came in under the previous administration, and has proved very popular. What is quite helpful is that the County Council do have quite a good discount on compost bins, and I'd encourage anybody who'd like to compost at home, who doesn't want to have an actual compost heap in their garden, to get a compost bin, because that again is, you can't do like thick branches, but you can do grass cuttings, smaller branches, leaves, and that is one of the most environmentally friendly ways to actually deal with your compost. So there are no plans for any additional waste collection in terms of compost on top of the green bin collection that Crawley Borough Council has. But I would encourage people to look into getting a compost bin, because composting at home is the most environmentally friendly thing that you can do, and that of course helps to reduce waste going anywhere.
Thank you. I am in an area, fortunately, where I live, where they do provide a small composting system, which is useful for those of us that can't always do it in our gardens. But it is a nice thing to be able to do with one's waste, and I struggled to get the hang of it originally, I do admit, like any housewife, but after a few years it has been actually a really nice idea, and I do feel much better using my waste in that way. Peter, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly benefits in dealing with food waste. What people need to bear in mind is, if that system was to come in, where they have that system, they don't take the blacktop bin waste on a weekly basis, by and large. And Crawley is one of only, it's less than a sixth of councils, I think, now that still do a weekly bin collection like we do. So, you'd have to minimise those vehicle movements, but you'd also, implausibly, if you can get all the food waste into a compost bin, you're going to have less demand for the blacktop waste anyway. Now, we know there's a big issue around waste in Crawley, in that we throw away basically less than anywhere else, but we also have a terrible recycling rate. And there's a whole range of theories as to why this is the case, and some of them are purely dodgy calculation reasons why it's not the case. But also we know that from going through the waste that people do throw away, there is a lot of recyclables being thrown into blacktop bins. And certainly whenever I've ever had people send me pictures saying my blacktop bin's overflowing, I need a bigger one, I can always see the recyclables poking out the top of their blacktop bin. So it is something we can do, but people need to bear in mind it will mean a drastic shift in the way we deal with waste, to having weekly compost collections, but no longer having a blacktop bin collection. And that might well be the way to go, but people were quite clear when we asked residents about changes to weekly collections in the survey earlier this year, that they'd rather keep the weekly collection and close down other services instead.
Thank you very much. I've got quite a specific question coming in now, which I'm going to pass to Steve, which is looking at crime in Broadfield, Barton. So Khan has asked, what are the police doing with regards to crime at Broadfield, Barton? Where he says that open drug selling and taking is happening publicly and visibly.
No, thank you for that question, Khan. To firstly reassure you that we are aware of it, and I'll tell you what actions we're doing in a second. Drug-related harm is obviously very impactful and very much a priority for us in Crawley, as it is in most policing areas. The key is often intelligence-led policing. So I want to echo the point of making sure that we are, if you can, and others that see it, please report, give us as much detail as possible, either through the 101 dial-in, online, at your convenience, or if it's happening there and then please phone us. But we are aware of it. We have increased our patrols, both high visibility patrols and plain clothes patrols. That helps us to populate any intelligence gaps, look at patterns, and look at proactive lines that we can take. Just to reassure you that we are regularly, Crawley is a safe place, and as I said to you, crime is reduced in all areas. That doesn't mean to say that open spaces in particular, you will see antisocial behaviour and drugs in open use from time to time, and it does shift around. So there's that overt response. We've recently done Operation Tangent, which is around high visibility, intelligence-led patrols of our open spaces. That's seen some really positive results, and I would encourage you to look at our social media platforms for the police, on both Facebook and Twitter, where you'll see where we are actively patrolling in response to, but also our positive results that you'll see around drug action and taking, both low-level and high-level drug dealers off of our communities.
Thank you very much. Just checking my new feed of questions coming in. Here they are, winging their way in. Right, my next question is from Terry Williams at Worth, who has sadly been suffering from pain and disability since last July, and has only finally been referred for a hip replacement. So he says, how much longer am I likely to have to wait? So I think we're all aware of the impact on regular NHS business from the COVID pandemic. So is there some reassurance that can be given to Terry about waiting times? Whereas I know that the NHS has been trying its best to run COVID as well as normal operations, but clearly there has been an impact. Who would like to come in first, Laura or Penny? One of you like to give me a wave? Penny, we'll go over to you first.
Again, I'm happy to start, and I'm sure Laura will wish to add. And just to say, we absolutely recognise that this has been hugely difficult for people who are seeking care that is important, but maybe not emergency care. And unfortunately, both in the first and the second wave of COVID, we have had to delay a lot of our planned care in order to provide capacity for people needing both normal and regular, as it were, urgent care alongside people requiring care for COVID or COVID related conditions. So we absolutely recognise that means that the waiting times for people both for outpatient and for surgery has gone up. We have done our absolute utmost to maintain through that period our services for people with cancer. Our primary care services have kept going all the way through, albeit that the sort of delivery models have changed, and we've kept as much as possible of our outpatients going as well, again with a change in the delivery model. We're using quite a lot of virtual outpatients, which has meant we've been able to do more than we would otherwise have done because it obviously doesn't have the restrictions around COVID social distancing, which as soon as people come into hospital, it means that the actual numbers of people we can see at in any clinic are reduced. So we've done as much as possible to keep as much of it going as we possibly can, but I absolutely recognise the impact that this is having on individuals where their care is delayed. We did start to restore most of that activity during the summer. We sadly had to stand it back down again during sort of the second wave from sort of late November onwards. We are starting to restore that activity. We're seeing, thankfully, our numbers across in line with the national position, but our numbers in West Sussex and in Crawley, our numbers of people with COVID and people coming into hospital have really reduced over the last few weeks. And I'm very grateful for people adherence to the social distancing measures that helps us with that, and then kind of encourage people to take up the vaccinations. That will really help us keep our levels down, and it will enable us to really stand back up our planned care. So we're starting that planned care work back up now. The way we're seeing people now, and I can't obviously comment on Mr. Williams' individual position, is that all the cases are considered on a clinical priority as they appointments become available. So whereas before we were very much treating people kind of in order, in the waiting times order, we're prioritising people whose care is emergency, followed by people whose care is urgent, and then people whose care is less urgent. We recognise people's view of that will feel different, and where people are suffering pain and disability, that will feel really, really difficult to individuals. But we have kind of clinical reviews of all of that, which Laura might want to say more about. And we would encourage, if someone has particular concerns that their condition has changed, then they do need to go back and speak to their practice or contact their hospital if they feel that their situation has changed. So I'm not able to give the individual a specific time, I'm afraid, but Laura may wish to say more about how we're handling this from a kind of clinical perspective.
Thank you very much. Laura, would you like to add anything on that clinical perspective?
Thank you very much. Pennie sort of summed up the majority of that extremely articulately. Thank you, Pennie. But I think it's fair to say that as we are now seeing, thankfully, a tailing off of COVID cases, and we were hit pretty hard in Crawley in this last wave, weren't we, to be fair? Our medical colleagues through general practice, through the hospitals, are fantastic volunteers. We're getting there. We've delivered something like 760,000 vaccinations across Sussex since we started just before Christmas doing those, and all of this is contributing to that lessening caseload. And the lesser the caseload gets, and the more we can rest some of these extremely tired colleagues, we can come back again with fervour and energy to catch up some of these waiting lists. Completely appreciate it. It's extremely frustrating if you're one of the unfortunate people who's waiting for some of these services, but colleagues in every trust, that's both the acute trust, the community, are looking very regularly at the lists of patients and prioritising and reprioritising to make sure that we're not missing anybody whose symptoms are changing or becoming more concerning. So do get in touch if you feel things have changed, and that will be re-looked at. But all of my colleagues across the system are absolutely committed to getting through these waiting lists and to getting things back on track. But for me, it's just a little bit of a plea in that our staff are really tired, much like many other key workers. So a little bit of understanding as we try to both give energy to the vaccination programme, continue to respond to the pandemic. We do still have poorly patients in hospital, though thankfully not as many. Give our clinicians a rest so that we can get back on it, and we will, and we'll catch up and get back to a better than normality, hopefully. Let's fingers crossed.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's been an impact in a huge number of ways. It does bring us to our next question, which is again a more economic question, but I think it does illustrate some of the challenges that everybody is experiencing here. So I have a T. Scott from Ifield West who asks, will an audit covering the period of the pandemic showing income, expenditure, monies from central government be made known so that local people can see and understand the effect on council funding and the current situation that comes from that? Peter, would you like to start with this one?
Sure. There are a number of auditing systems at place in the council. First off, everything that we spend in relation to COVID has to go back to government as a record for them to check to see if they're okay with the expenditure. Secondly, any member of the public can go to our website right now. If you go to democracy.crawley.gov.uk, and if you go to the Cabinet's papers there, you can find every quarter a report called the Budget Monitoring Report, and there is a table set out there which shows exactly what the council has received in COVID funding and exactly what has been spent in relation to that. And lastly, the council is required to be audited annually by external auditors who check all of these costs. So we are essentially the most audited part of the public sector, and we always come out with flying colours, and no doubt when we get next year's audits, that is exactly what will happen again. But I can tell you the costs of that external audit are quite significant and required to be paid by the local area, regardless of what you think of it. They're essentially Ernst & Young to call the shots what councils pay them, and we're required to take whoever we're assigned by the Audit Commission so they can write their own cheque. Not a great auditing process if you ask me, but that was the system the government chose in when they did away with the Audit Commission's direct accountability on this one. But yeah, I wouldn't say we'd need yet another audit because it would just be a needless expense to the taxpayer. But since the government, the public and external auditors all have access to our accounts to check these things, you can be confident that we're the one bit of the public sector that is genuinely spending the money on whatever it is that we've said we have.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to ask Bob to come in as well, as I think that corporate governance and transparency is important to all the public bodies. So could you just confirm that West Sussex also has those systems in place for the benefit of our viewers today?
Yeah, yes, indeed. I mean, and we're very grateful for the amount of funding that we received as an upper tier local authority, and yeah, we can certainly broadcast what those grants are. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Oh, this is a very long question, so bear with me. I have a Jeffrey Petto from Southgate. So he says he's very grateful to the council, whether it's West Sussex or Crawley, for trying to deal with some of the issues on the roads. Sorry, I'm struggling with my tech here in order to read the whole question. He says that he's very grateful for the way in which you've tried to repair the potholes, but have not been done so well. He said most that he's seen, the hole has not been fully filled with tarmac. It's as if they're trying to make the tarmac go further and stretch it out. Not filling the hole completely means that the majority of repairs don't last very long. I assume these repairs are carried out by external contractors. So what is the accountability whereby these repairs are impacted, and how do you hold the contractor to account for poor workmanship? And I also appreciate, I'm going to add a supplementary question here of my own, which is how do you manage to deal with the challenges between just patching things up and the requirement sometimes that patching up just gives you a longer term problem, and that it would have been better if you'd been able to afford to do the whole road in the first place? And Bob, yes, I know this is a question for you, so over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the question. I used to have the highways and infrastructure portfolio at county, in fact, and we have been ramping up the number of potholes we've been filling. I mean, roughly, if you look at 2019, we repaired about 16,000. 2020, we repaired about 20,000. So more resources have gone into it. The contractor is held to account by virtue of clauses within that contract. You'd understand that I can't go into that detail in a public debate, but there is accountability for sure. In terms of the method of repairing a pothole, that's going to sometimes, it depends on several factors like the urgency, the location, the availability of resources, and which teams happen to be in that area or can be rapidly deployed to a particular area. There are different ways of patching, but sometimes sometimes it's so urgent you have to do a temporary one and then come back to do a permanent one, because you simply cannot leave it. And what I would encourage the questioner to do, and indeed everyone else watching and listening, is to use the facilities we have for reporting potholes. We do have service response times on every type of pothole, and perhaps the best way to do it is to use the Love West Sussex app, which keeps you up to date with progress on the particular pothole you've reported, and it also tries to eliminate duplicate reporting, so we get round to as many potholes to repair as possible. I'll emphasise it's not a problem that's unique to West Sussex. Potholes don't respect county boundaries or borough boundaries or district boundaries. They're everywhere, and as I say, our investment and our resourcing into repairing them has gone up, as I've illustrated, by a 25% increase in the number we've been able to repair as compared to the previous year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got a good question next, which comes in from Sally Pavey from Communities Against Gatwick Noise Emissions. CAGNY, it's a good name. So it says Crawley Council voted to oppose a second runway at Gatwick Airport and has pledged its green credentials. But as Gatwick seeks to rebuild the emergency runway as a second runway, which will add an extra 618,000 to 1 million tonnes of carbon a year and vapours, will the council be opposing this and seeking to create a greener, more sustainable jobs for economic stability for Crawley? So that's an interesting question. I know we're all keen for our aviation industry to return because of its impact on employment, but clearly sustainability is also an issue to be balanced. Peter, shall we start with you on this one? Peter Lam, please.
Thank you. I mean, this is the exact same proposal that we were discussing last full council a couple of years back, when the council voted that it wouldn't be in support of it for a number of reasons. So that nothing's changed to that extent, and I find it very surprising that they're moving ahead with that at the moment, to be honest, bearing in mind that it will take some time for demand to regain its previous, get back to its previous levels, particularly at Gatwick, because a lot of its previous traffic and carriers have moved to Heathrow. So you wouldn't have thought they'd need it, and it's hard to work out quite why they're doing it. As part of the process, the Borough Council will be required to sort of feed in on our views on their proposal in terms of the planning side of things, so the very technical side of it. But people need to bear in mind it's not a planning application that will come to us. It goes to a government planning inspector, and then we fit into it, which then results in a difficult issue, because it means that we essentially don't have any of the funding we'd usually get to look at the application while being asked to undertake very detailed technical exercises. So we were trying to get a deal with Gatwick around getting funding that would enable us to do that work. Of course, at the time we were criticised by groups like CAGNY about trying to get that funding. Although without that funding, people need to bear in mind we will not be able to submit any accurate work really on the nature of the runway, because we simply won't have the resources available to do it. So we are still pushing quite hard to try and get some funding to be able to have enough expertise and enough planning officer time to be feeding into that proposal. But it's worth bearing in mind the government doesn't really care what the council's position is on this. It will make up its mind based purely on planning criteria, and that's what our officers will be responding on.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come in on this one? Bob, are you waving at me, or is that just a?
Yeah, I was kind of indicating in my own inadequate way there. Thank you. Yeah, I just from a West Sussex County Council perspective, we are neutral policy terms on the use of the standby runway, but of course we have a technical role to play in terms of the process that has just been referred to, the development consent order process, which, as Peter has said, is nationally determined. I'm bound to make the comment that the discussions around Gatwick are always principally around economy and environment, and I want to speak for both clearly, but I've got to make the observation that when we criticise or offer a critique of Gatwick in an environmental context, we need to recognise that there isn't going to be any rapid general economic recovery in our area without some kind of recovery of aviation, hospitality and the leisure sector. And while it's true, as the questioner implies, we should seek to build back better and in a greener and sustainable way, that activity is complementary to what I would call a traditional economic recovery. There's a traditional recovery, and if you like, there's a novel recovery as well around new areas of activity, such as our electric vehicle charging networks, solar, green business initiatives and the like. And these recovery initiatives are complementary to get people back to work in Crawley and in the wider West Sussex economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put a question of my own in here, I'm afraid, which is that that balance of sustainability and economy, I think, is going to be a challenge facing all of us going forward, and particularly for this area. So there's a lot of talk about the length of time that it will take to get that aviation industry back. And I think I saw a prediction recently that it could take 18 months to 2 years to get the same level of traffic back at Gatwick that we had before, which is clearly going to have an economic impact. So is there anybody on the panel today that would like to talk about the way in which it might be possible to give that aviation industry a boost, either locally or nationally, in order to try to take us forward and try to restore some of that employment, high levels of employment for which Crawley has been historically famed? Everyone will now go quiet on me, but if somebody would like to wave a hand, I'm going to start with Peter Lam. Is there anything that the local authority can do in order to get that aviation industry going?
No, I mean, there's nothing that can be done on the local level. I mean, bearing in mind that Gatwick's, the cost to Gatwick, its net loss during much of the summer was £1 million a day. And the Borough Council's budget is about £12 million a day. You know, we're not going to have that sort of scale. But also, I think it's a mistake to assume that we're going to get significant amounts of employment back at the airport. Clearly, we'll get a large amount back, but because it's going to take a while for it to recover, and because of the nature of a lot of those jobs, we were already seeing job losses in that sector anyway. It was assumed that Gatwick, in delivering this new runway or this dual running of the runways, wouldn't need to provide any additional employment on the airport. That's part of their model. That's why they're able to argue that you don't need any additional housing as part of it. And what we've seen since this all kicked off is an increase in the levels of automation, an increase in the restructuring of workforces to need fewer people on poorer terms and conditions to operate. So we do not have an alternative other than to develop other forms of economy in the local area, even if we had no concerns over aviation at all. Aviation will recover. It will require a big number of people to go back to work in it, but we will not get back up to that levels of employment without developing new sectors. And that's where we're throwing an awful lot of efforts at the moment as a borough council to get different forms of employment into the area, particularly based around green tech, because that's going to grow at roughly the same rate. We assume that we're going to have to be taking an awful lot of that demand out of more polluting sectors.
So that leaves me on. I don't actually have anybody representing the education sector, I think, particularly. But what can be done, I'll come to you in a minute, Bob, I think you're up there, and also Duncan, in order to reskill us, because effectively for so long, a particular set of skills has been done. But what can be done and what is being done in order to skill our young people up for the low carbon technologies, for the digital economy of the future, rather than some of our more traditional industries? Bob, you had your hand raised, so do you want to start with the previous question, and I'm happy if you then want to move on to skills?
Yeah, well, yes, thank you. I mean, they overlap to some extent, but just responding in part to Peter's comments. Yeah, I mean, we'll take time to recover at the airport, but I've got to observe that in the hospitality sector, in the travel sector, and I think in the aviation sector as well, there is a lot of pent-up demand out there once we start to really conquer this pandemic, and there is a real prospect of a demand-led recovery that we need to be ready for in all of those important sectors. At the same time, it is right to engage in a more novel recovery in terms of the green agenda. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. There are bids in place for Crawley to have an innovation centre and for an institute of technology, and that really is a response to your point about skills, to skill up in newer technologies, newer activities. And so we have all of these initiatives in place, but I've never come to a meeting, a virtual one or a physical one, even remotely kind of predicting the end of the world, and I'm not about to break that habit this evening. So I do say to you, reiterate, there is every prospect that demand-led recovery through pent-up demand, as well as a more innovative recovery in terms of building a different set of skills for the future economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's two things really on this base point. One is there's an immediate short-term problem where people are now finding themselves out of work, especially from aviation, hospitality and also retail. And there's also a more medium to long-term problem, which is what do we do about diversification and reducing our reliance on the airport and aviation, especially with climate change and all that implies. In terms of helping people in the short term, the Borough Council have started an organisation called Employ Crawley, and they've also partnered with the DWP to try and help people in the short term. But more importantly, in the long term, we've formed a group called the Crawley Economic Recovery Task Force, which has got something like 56 representatives of businesses, education, social support across the whole town. And they have been working since the summer to put together a recovery programme. And as one of the strands in that, one of the pillars is skills and education. And that group is being led by Sheila LeGrave, who is the I forget her full title, but she's the head of the college, supported by Julie Capsalis, the commercial director, who's also on the Coast Capital Let, chair of the Coast Capital Let. So we've got a heavy duty team there working on bringing forward an Institute of Technology based on the local college site, working with education authorities and businesses to identify needs and courses and to put more in place to both support people right now, but also to support the skills and abilities and training that people are going to need for the new jobs that we're hoping to find, particularly green jobs. So, for example, if we have replacement for gas across town, we'll have to do replacement engineering in everybody's house. So what does that mean, and who's going to do that, and what skills do they need, and how can we make sure that Crawley businesses resource that and Crawley people get these jobs and get well-paid jobs? So I mean, I could talk for a very long time about this. It is available on the web. It's a big comprehensive programme, but as Peter said, it's not a 5-minute solution. So we're going to have a very tough time for the next couple of years, I think, and we're doing our best with the limited funds we have. I think Peter mentioned £12 million a day. It's actually a year, just to make sure that we get that absolutely right. So it's a very small amount of money. So our contribution, which I'm quite proud of it, we've done a lot of work on it, but our contribution is to try and organise the whole community, external sources, and most importantly, to bring in external funding, and we've secured some of that as well. So I think that's what I'll say at the moment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pennie, I'm going to turn to you, and then just advance warning, Leon, that I'm going to come up to you to ask you about how the young people feel about skills and careers for the future, because I'm very aware that when I grew up, Crawley was the place we all came to work, and we all thought that would be a good place for us to base our careers. And the world is a different place now, and I'd like to think that that was still there, albeit in different industries. But Pennie, I can see your hand up, so I'm going to come to you first.
Thank you, and actually I will be really keen to hear Leon's views, because I just wanted to pick up the theme around skills. Actually, it's not so much around economic development around skills, but just to say I think I think one of the things about the pandemic is actually it's possibly raised people's awareness around the health and care sector even more than the NHS was kind of loved beforehand. But it's really to say it's not just about doctors and nurses. There's a huge range of careers across the health and care sector. There are people with skills in the aviation you know, and the leisure and the kind of hotel industry that we're very welcome actually in the healthcare services, and we're really keen for our young people to actively consider careers in the health sector. So as I said, it's not just about doctors and nurses, or indeed about the wider range of clinical professions, which is many, wide range of therapists and mental health services, but also things like medical sciences. There's areas around administration, reception, estates, engineering, digital, catering, so data analysis, human resources, finance management, may I even dare say it. So there's quite a range of careers, and I know that when I was a younger person and I thought about the health service, I kind of thought, not sure I'm really practical enough to be a doctor or a nurse. I didn't realise until I went into it through a sort of a management route, the wide range of opportunities, and I wish I'd known about some of those, and that my kind of young friends had known about those, because I think some people might have made different career choices if only they'd known the kind of exciting range of opportunities. So really keen to hear what Leon thinks from the perspective of a young person, and to continue to work with our colleges and colleagues to really advocate for that.
Thank you. I think you could have had a second career in the recruitment industry, actually. Leon, what's your view? How do people feel about their futures now? And is it a different feeling to the ones that you may have had 18 months ago? Is this still the place to be?
Yes, thank you. So as you've said, we all know that during the pandemic, a lot of people have sadly lost their jobs as well, and it's the importance of these skills, because we've seen that a lot of jobs within, is it the primary sector? I'm not too sure, but a lot of jobs in stuff like retail, we've seen Gatwick have been either gone or been replaced by a lot of technology as well. And in my personal opinion, I see in the future, a lot of jobs are going to be technology orientated as well. So as Pennie was saying, in the NHS, it's not all about doctors and nurses, but there's a lot of jobs. Like even a couple of weeks ago, I was surprised to see that there's a lot of jobs in IT, engineering within the NHS. And I was quite shocked as well, because I see the NHS as somewhere where there's doctors and nurses. So it's us researching these things, because there's a lot of jobs out there in lots of different sectors, and even reskilling. I know that the government has put a lot of funding into people getting qualifications who had already had jobs, who had lost them, and it's just about being aware of all the opportunities that we have around us, and being prepared and having the adequate skills for them.
Thank you very much. That was a nice vote of confidence in the ability to look just outside the box. I know we're used to being in boxes, but to think a little bit more about outside the box in terms of the way in which there are opportunities where you did not necessarily expect them to be. And I think that will be a good way forward for our people. I'm going to bring us back to earth now, quite literally, with my next question, which is from Francine Burge, I believe, hope I pronounced that correctly, which is, can Crawley Borough Council and West Sussex County Council start to turn grassed verges into hard surfacing instead of having vehicles churn them up and make the areas around Crawley look in a bad way? So perception is important. What can be done? And should we turn our grass verges into hard surfacing? Now, there is a controversial question, I think. So I think I saw Duncan wave at me, but I'm not entirely sure quite often whether it's you or your background that's waving at me, but I think it was you. Would you like to come on and answer that one?
Yes, please. Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. I could talk for hours about parking, but I won't. I think everyone will be pleased to hear. This is a very difficult subject for us all, and particularly at this time of year. We've had quite a lot of rain this winter, and some of our grass verges are looking in an awful state where people have been parking their vehicles on them, and you know, I really wish that they wouldn't do it, quite honestly. You know, in the summer it's not so bad when the grass is growing and the ground is dry, but at this time of year it makes an awful mess. Now, you know, I can speak at this from both the Crawley Borough and the West Sussex angle. Yes, so West Sussex are the highway or authority, but they do not have the money, quite frankly, for this kind of projects. They have a huge capital programme. They build new schools, extensions to schools, building a new fire training centre, £20 million. They have an ambitious capital programme, but they do not have the money for on-street parking improvements. Now, in the past, Crawley Borough did have the money for this and did used to have a programme, and when the Borough Council carried out this programme, the County Council would contribute to particular schemes financially. But this programme was rescinded a few years ago due to less funds being available. The capital programme at the Borough Council has spent a lot of money on a lot of things, and you know, that they are good things, but it has reduced the amount of funds that are available. Now, in an ideal world, I would like to bring this programme back, and it has previously been a pledge of my group to do so in local elections, and it still remains an ambition. But I'm also a realist in that we, especially post-COVID, that we're not likely to have the funds at this time to be able to do any sort of meaningful programme to create extra parking provision. But unfortunately, the way that the town was designed, it was designed with a lot of terrace properties with very little off-street parking, and therefore the vision wasn't there, unfortunately, for the amount of vehicles that we have today. Of course, we have more people making greater use of housing, so we have more houses of multiple occupation, although we have now brought in planning permission needed for 3-storey houses of multiple occupation. But it's not something that I think any of us are going to have the money to be able to do anytime soon, unfortunately, as much as we'd like to be able to do this. Certainly going forward through the planning process, we can ensure that there is adequate parking provision for all new developments. But other than that, we are struggling at the moment, quite frankly, because you know, money is tight, and as much as we'd like to help relieve the parking difficulties, and indeed it does remain an ambition of mine and my colleagues, if we do take power come the May elections, certainly for the year ahead, we're not going to have the funds, but if we were able to do in the future, then definitely we would look at trying to bring a programme back. But we'd have to be realistic about the scale of that programme, what that would likely to be achieved. It could probably achieve something in the very worst streets, but it's not going to be able to achieve something in every street that has a parking problem. Sometimes the cost per additional car parking space that's created, you know, can often cost more than the actual value of the car that we parked on there. It can cost up to £7,000 per new space, on-street parking space created. So you can see how potentially expensive this could get. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure others will want to come in, but you know, I'm more than welcome to come back on this because it is something we'd like to do. But when, you know, certainly post-COVID, we're definitely more constrained now.
Thank you very much. Peter Lam, would you like to also come in on this one?
Yeah, I think I'd largely say the same as Duncan, other than the figure there. When we actually did a tally up, we found that on the schemes the council had proceeded with, the cost per additional bay ranged between £10,000 and £30,000 per bay, which is a staggering amount of money. Now, people might struggle to understand why that is. It's because when the town was built, and there was an assumption that there would be one car for every 10 houses, particularly when the early bits were built, they ran all the utilities through the grass beds. So whenever you're putting in any of these schemes, you're effectively having to redirect all of the utilities in the area. So the total cost is huge. I mean, that is well beyond what either council could in practice afford these days. Long gone are the days of having 100 million in the bank. You know, we will be spending almost all of our usable reserves over the next couple of years. Just, you know, to have enough money coming forward to be able to keep services functioning. But on top of that, the actual number of bays created per scheme doesn't tend to be very high. When you make things highways compliant, if you're taking out a verge, you're going from parking up against that verge to, you know, maybe having a bit more space so you can do it as fishbone sort of parking. It has a couple of additional spaces. It doesn't add a huge number of additional spaces if the thing is going to be parking compliant, and you will find within a year they fill up. So, you know, the reality is there's no way of making up for the level of demanded parking in Crawley because of, you know, as we said at the time, they assume there's going to be one bay for every 10 houses. There's simply no way of correcting that without sort of building vertically and you know, doing any number of things that we simply haven't got the physical or financial capability to do. You know, the only solution the council really has in terms of trying to help people is trying to make it easier for people to use other forms of transportation to get around, because you're never going to have enough parking for all the demand that there is, you know, regardless of whether or not cars are entirely green or what have you. You just physically can't make more space, and the cost would mean, frankly, the amount of money we're talking about, the amount of borrowing you're talking about, you will be paying off for generations on something where, in terms of the development of self-driving cars, we may well not have any need for in 20 years, which doesn't feel like the right decision to be taking for the town, even if we had that money to borrow that amount of money.
I'm afraid I am with you on this one, as I am hoping that as we move into a more sustainable future, that we will simply have fewer cars, and therefore we can keep more of our grass verges looking pleasant and beautiful, so we can enjoy the area we live in. I have a request come in for a clarification on a medical item, which I'm going to ask Laura to answer. It's from Patricia Upham Hill from Ifield, which says, please can you advise that the second vaccination must be within 12 weeks? A member of the NHS vaccination team at Crawley Hospital has stated it's still safe for the second vaccination to be given after the 12 weeks. To me, this is a concern. There is clearly an amount of confusion out there, so I think it would be fantastic if, Laura, perhaps you could come in and clarify this for our viewers today.
Thanks very much, and thanks for Patricia for your question. So this is really important. There are two elements to this. There is the known evidence around the efficacy of when those doses should be timed, balanced against the need for us to be vaccinating as many in our population who are vulnerable to complications of COVID as possible. So we know that interval between the initial research, which was shorter, was drawn out to the 12 weeks for your second dose. Life just doesn't happen like that, does it? So the second dose invitations are usually sent out around about week 11. Some people may be able to time those to get them slightly sooner, and some people might go over the 12 weeks, but it's perfectly safe and indeed vital to still go ahead and have it, even if you are slightly without the 12 weeks. We know that the vaccine efficacy after one dose is pretty good, up to sort of 80%, 21 or so days after that first vaccination, and that increases yet further with the second. So it's almost less of a vitalness about timing specifically that 12 weeks, but definitely getting the second vaccination in at that sort of 12 weeks and beyond point. Not to worry if it's slightly later than that. The most important thing is that you go and get that second dose. We are really trying to reach out, as Patricia and others will know who are tuned in, to try and break down some of the misconceptions. We have a lot of vaccine hesitancy in some groups across Sussex, and we're trying to reach out and reassure people that this is a safe vaccination. So does what it says on the tin. It will protect you from the worst complications that COVID can bring, and is absolutely vital if we're going to get our communities back on track, get the economic issues that we've all been discussing starting to resolve, and get our communities up and running again and back to a normality. So yeah, thank you for the question, Patricia, and we are doing our utmost to try and think innovatively around ideas to make it easier for people to get their first and second doses. So as well as the GP practices that have been offering them around Crawley, we now have the Crawley Hospital as a vaccination centre, and we also have a bus. Thank you to all involved in getting that up and running. We're quite great with innovations around buses in Crawley from our dementia-friendly approach a little while ago to this. And one of the vaccination sites will be moving to our Hindu temple in Langley Green, I think this week actually, to try and increase the ease really of accessing those vaccinations. Obviously also been going out to care homes and have had amazing support from the volunteers who keep everything moving, even on the most dreariest, dismal, rainy, cold days, getting people to the right place, gelling hands and wiping things down in between. So it's been a real community effort.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for that clarification. I have quite a long question now, which I'm going to read out, which is about trying to balancing our countryside, saving our countryside, and the requirement and the need for greater housing. So this is from John Cuban from Three Bridges, and he asks, when our MP has his meeting with Robert Jenrick, Secretary of State, would you encourage him to not only repeat his objection to the Homes England West of Ifield proposal, but to go further by asking for a fundamental boundary review to safeguard Crawley's immediately surrounding countryside from development by neighbouring planning authorities? The supposed duty to cooperate simply isn't working, as shown by Mid-Sussex District Council and Thackham Homes' incursion into the high-wheeled area of outstanding natural beauty at Pease Pottage. I actually think we had a little on this last year because it is quite difficult to make sure that you can protect your surrounding area. Peter Smith, you would like to come in on this one with your knowledge of the planning.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, John, for your question. I've seen your emails on this subject. You're quite right that the duty to cooperate actually works quite well in terms of producing plans for adjacent authorities where all the numbers add up, but it doesn't actually do anything more than that. And so far, certainly with our neighbours, we haven't actually had any of our homes built outside our boundary, despite our first local plan being adopted in 2015. When you look at a scheme, well, firstly, the size of the one at Dillgate, this was foist on our boundaries in an area of outstanding national beauty by our neighbouring authority, and we simply got consulted as a statutory consultee on that development. And of course, we were not involved in it, not consulted, had no say in the design, the layout, etc. And in fact, even now, I think that development there has no footpath to walk to A2 for it. So there's a large housing estate that's 100% vehicle oriented. It's completely unacceptable. In terms of the Homes England proposals to the west of Ifield, I think all parties, and I believe the MP, have come out fairly strongly against that. And the main issue there, of course, is the matter of the scale of it. It's approximately 25% growth in the size of Crawley in one jump in the context of the number of houses. And both Peter Lam and I have met with Horsham and with Homes England ever since we were made aware of this scheme. We've made it very clear that we expect to be properly consulted and involved in it, and that we expect that Crawley's needs should be taken care of and listened to in this development, whereas technically it's a Horsham site if they choose to adopt it, and Horsham can be the decision makers on their own if they wish. So yes, we have also had meetings with the MP. I meet with the MP and with the Chief Executive on a quarterly basis. We've made clear our feelings on this, and that we think that Crawley should have a say in these proposals even before it gets to getting into the Horsham local plan. Crawley people have got very strong feelings about it. We don't want to see another great add-on to our town with all the infrastructure, etc., that we need, especially when we're struggling to provide jobs for our own people at the moment. We've got congestion, pollution, parking problems, etc. We don't need 10,000 homes on it. I think that's enough now. So yes, I agree with the gist of your point. Every chance I get to speak to the MP personally, I make my views quite clear and quite forcibly so.
Thank you very much, Peter. Duncan, I can see you'd also like to come in on this one. Can we go over to Duncan?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, firstly, just to reiterate that indeed, and I think the questioner recognised it as well in his question, that the RMP has indeed been very vocal about his concerns for the West of Ifield development, and indeed has been making representations to government and Homes England about it. The question also asked about a change in borough boundaries to potentially for us to restrict new development. And realistically, that is unlikely, to say the least. What is perhaps more likely at some future point, and without wishing to start a whole new debate, is if there was a reorganisation of local government and we had a northern West Sussex unitary authority, that would then straight away mean that there would be one authority covering a much larger area of land, and that authority could make those strategic planning decisions for that whole area as to what best suits that area. Of course, Crawley is the largest and the most urban district or borough in the whole of West Sussex, and we're the most, we're the most densely populated, the most built up. And yes, we can't meet our housing need. I do want to just correct something that Councillor Peter Smith said. He said about the duty to cooperate. But what has happened is that, for example, when Kilnwood Vale was built, which is within Horsham District Council's area, Crawley Borough Council did have 50% nomination rights for the social housing that was on site. So therefore, that was particularly helpful for Crawley. And of course, when people live and work, they're not that minded about borough and district boundaries, quite honestly. They want to be near where they want to be, but what side of a boundary they live on doesn't, I don't think, matter particularly to people. But I do share the frustration that other authorities have tacked on development to the edge of Crawley, and certainly the development at Pease Pottage. I was a member of the council's planning committee at that time when we were advised, when we were acting as an advisor, as Councillor Peter Smith mentioned, and there was unanimity on the planning committee against the proposals at Pease Pottage, but unfortunately they happened and we didn't have any say. But when it comes to West of Ifield, it's right that Crawley Borough has as much say as possible over this, because the impacts will be felt in Crawley, and the infrastructure is going to be needed. And the concern that I have is that the infrastructure could be delayed from the housing, and that's something that we do see quite commonly over the years. So Crawley definitely needs a seat at that table. Indeed, I think I've got a briefing with Homes England coming up myself, and I think other members have as well quite shortly. And Crawley's voice needs to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter Lam, you would like to come in as well on this one?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of potentially changing boundaries, we did actually ask before any of this kicked off about trying to have what's called a principal area review, which would have brought the space into the boundaries and given us the ability to determine what would happen if something was going to happen. But the answer was no. I'm not convinced that there is a solution in merging authorities. Partly because if you talk to people who live in the town of Horsham, they'll tell you that all the planning decisions there are taken by Conservatives who live in the rural parts of the south, which usually involve urban extensions that they don't want there either. So I'm not convinced that having a larger area necessarily results in the people who live in the town getting any more say over what's happening in their local area. Certainly, residents' views on services being run from Chichester are quite often a perception of distance there, and it's probably not something we want to replicate. Kilnwood Vale is a pretty clear example about how this policy doesn't work, in the sense that, yes, we got 50% of the nomination rights, but Kilnwood Vale was built out under Horsham's local plan. So if you were building a development in Crawley, you'd be required to make sure that 40% of the housing there was affordable, of which 70% would have to be social housing. So that's council housing or housing association properties for available on a cheap rent for local residents. In the case of Horsham, I think it ended up being about 120 houses that were social housing out of about a 2,500 property development. So we get about 60 houses out of the whole of Kilnwood Vale. Now that isn't necessarily meeting Crawley's housing needs when you look at the composition of Kinwood Vale and the price of that housing relative to local incomes. And this is exactly the problem is, you know, allegedly neighbouring authorities are meeting our housing needs, but they're doing it by building enormous housing that no one in the town can actually afford, which is kind of foolhardy from their position if they're really anti-housing development, because then they're bringing more people into the local area who would then have subsequent housing demand on top of the existing demand and just create greater pressure. What would make far more sense is if we were given the opportunity to build out land that is available to meet the town's actual needs, so that people in the town who need housing will be able to afford what is provided. Instead, we're required to increasingly just let developers do whatever they want, which is certainly the direction of travel in terms of recent planning changes, which we know means that in terms of meeting the town's affordable needs, less than 25% of it will get met in the whole course of our next local plan, even with the duty to cooperate with our neighbouring authorities. The planning system is fundamentally broken, and instead of fixing it, it's being made more and more broken in terms of meeting people's actual needs.
I'm going to thank everyone for their views on that one. I'm aware we're only down to our last 20 minutes or so, so we've got a number of questions which cover everything from wide-ranging issues down to complete specifics. So we're going to go to the to move away from a conversation about the wider housing issues and planning, which I think could happily occupy us for an entire seminar, to something a little bit more specific, which is from an anonymous viewer. And they have asked, the daycare centre at Maidenbower Community Centre has been empty for a while, and does anyone know what is happening with the building? So do I have anybody here with knowledge of the daycare centre at Maidenbower? Bob, let us know what you know about what's happening over there.
Well, thank you. I'll refer to the building. The County Council leases that building from Crawley Borough Council, and the County Council is considering a couple of future uses for that building now, service options. In addition, we have an inquiry we're looking at from an individual organisation to offer a service, and I don't know who the inquirer is, but if they have any particular proposal for using part of the building, then please feel free to write to me with that as well on robert.lanza@westsussex.gov.uk, and we'll see what we can do with any suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I've now got Kenneth McIntosh asking us, following the Grenfell fire, the government is allegedly providing funds for fire precautions work to multi-occupation buildings. Crawley moved promptly to strip old paint back to bare wall and interior corridors, and the cost for this precautionary work was shared, and tenants who own their own apartments were passed invoices for this. Substantial as they are, it's being paid for. If Crawley applies for government funds, will they apply some reimbursement to the tenants who have previously put their hands in their pockets? So will CBC apply some reimbursement to tenants who privately owned? Peter Lam, over to you for this one.
Well, essentially, if we apply for funds, if there is still work that needs doing, then it will first and foremost have to go towards that. If there's any money left over, we'll have to see whether or not we're legally allowed to. But I would have thought that would be the fair thing to do at the end of the day, would be to share some of that back to the people who've incurred costs. Ultimately, this comes back to the point which was discussed earlier around, you know, potentially installing a secure bike shed, that any building which is partly owned by the council and partly owned by private tenants, you have to equally share the costs out, because the money which go towards council properties doesn't come out of council tax. It's nothing at all to do with that service area. It is money that is paid by those people living in those properties, the tenants, towards the council for maintaining those properties. So we can't use that pot of money to then subsidise another group of people who've bought their own property or subsequently had it sold to them from someone who did.
Thank you very much for that clarification. It's difficult because I'm aware there's quite a lot of outstanding work, and that there has been a lot of challenges for people living in buildings that need work. I have a question from John Bolton from Pound Hill. going back to our sustainability issue, but looking at it now from a business perspective and asking what incentives are available for local businesses to recycle more and to be greener. So is there anything we can do to encourage businesses to participate in our drive to net zero? And I'm going to look at Bob. Would that be a good place for me to start? Are there specific incentives that you are aware of for businesses to take up greater recycling, to be more sustainable, to improve their carbon footprint?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm not, I'll have to get back on that. I'm not aware of specific local financial incentives. There was a scheme operated on behalf of DEFRA, and that's the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, called the it's got an acronym, WRAP, Waste and Resources Action Programme, through which grants were available, but I'm not sure of its current status. But if the inquirer can give me leave their details somehow, I'll happily get back to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm aware there's a number of questions that we won't necessarily get around to today, but they will all get answered in due course. So if people want to put comments in or leave details, there will be responses to all the questions eventually. I'm a business myself, and I do agree that while one would like to be more sustainable, one has to balance it. So if there are incentives available, I would also be interested in finding out about them. So I will also be sending you a query. So as we move into our final questions, I have Rebecca Turville from Pound Hill back again. So please could the council explain why applications to secondary schools see many families being allocated their second choice catchment school when they could have received a first choice placement with what is effectively direct swap? Surely allowing more families their first choice school in a system which suggests choice would be a significant benefit. So I hope that makes sense to the people who deal with those issues on a daily basis. It's clearly important for people to try to get their first choice, to try to get families together, to try not to travel too much. And I can see that those are always issues with friends and families dealing with the secondary education system. Would anybody like to come in on this question? Duncan, would you like to come in on this one?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I can certainly appreciate the frustration that any parent who does not get their first choice allocation of secondary school. What I would say is that the percentage of parents who did get their first place, I seem to recall it was around 86%, that sort of level. That figure could be wrong, but I do recall the county council announcing that it was quite a high figure this year, which is always pleasing. But of course, it's not possible, sadly, for everyone to get their first choice. But first and or second choice is particularly high. So I understand the frustrations. I say being a parent, but not got any non-adult children anymore. But I've been there myself. I know how difficult it has been as a parent, and it does ebb and flow. So a few years ago in Crawley, we were particularly struggling for school places, and then suddenly we sometimes struggle to fill schools, and of course that has an impact for funding. So the county council do their best with population studies to sort of see what the future demand would be, and to allocate the resources in terms of how many entries, class entries they have per school, to accommodate the number of pupils. But sadly, it is inevitable that in some cases pupils will have to not go to the school that isn't their first choice. But like I say, the figures, the numbers that do is particularly high, and I believe the figure is over 80% this year, but I can't be exact on that. I can't remember the exact figure, but I do recall it was particularly high this year.
Thank you very much. I have a question which is quite specific coming in, which is a reference to community waste collection. So Janet Node from Maidenbower Playgroup said that they've not had their nappy bin emptied for weeks, and they're a bit worried about the health hazard created by the nappies. They've emailed the community centre team, who've tried very hard to contact the people who normally empty it, but no success in sorting it out. So is anyone aware of any issues in that area, and what can be done to resolve what's clearly an issue for Janet and the Maidenbower Playgroup? Bob, you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, Thank you. And as with one of the previous questions, I'm really coming in as the county councillor for Maiden Barrow and Worth rather than in any other role. And of course, I'm sorry to read of this situation. I've got it on my screen, and if I can have the contact details recorded, obviously I'll escalate the matter promptly.
Thank you. I think that goes with many of the questions that we're going to be looking at to try to resolve once today is over. I've got Francige Burge back again. So she's talking about the latest trial suggestions of booking slots at the Recycling the Amenity tip, and how is that going to work for Crawley residents? I think I have seen a bit of coverage about this, and I will confess that there's a booking system at the recycling centre where I live, and I really like it because I've now got very used to it. So, Bob, back to you again.
Yeah, thank you very much, and to some extent I'm responding on this one in a customer service perspective. And you've just made a very interesting observation. It's not unusual to have a booking system of this kind, and I'll rattle off a few names to illustrate the point of other councils that do it. So other areas, local government areas. So Manchester, Hertfordshire, Newport, Suffolk, Birmingham. So it's not uncommon. You know, what we do know, even without a booking system, is that in 2019, we experienced a real peak in demand at about this time of year or slightly later, to such an extent that at some of our sites, we had a police request to close them because of the road safety issues that were generated. And given the company on this panel, I'm not about to say that West Sussex County Council is going to ignore a police request, yeah? So there would be a real risk of an unpredictable closure of a tip. Now, you know, I've got to add, fundamentally, what we all need to do is try and reduce our waste output in the first place. But we've got other factors operating now. We've had to reduce the capacity at all of our tips to maintain social distancing, and we'll still be doing that even after the 12th of April. Add to that lots of houses with pent-up demand because they're full of cardboard from certain delivery companies, and you have to try and manage that demand. And what we have here is a booking system you can operate on your smartphone, laptop, tablet, and there's also a telephone channel into our customer contact centre. And yes, there is a limit in this trial, and it is only a trial at this point, starting on 29th of March. There is a limit of 1 visit per household per week. But again, that's not terribly unusual. And the reason for that is we know from experience elsewhere that if you don't have that, you get people booking multiple slots and not turning up, and that denies access to their fellow citizens. A bit like appointments at a GP surgery, where people don't honour those appointments and reduce the capacity in the system for other people. It is a trial. We welcome feedback as it occurs, but you know, let's give it a chance. The important point is it guarantees you a slot at the recycling site. And before you go to a recycling site, I say this to everyone, remember the excellent curbside collection service operated by Crawley Borough Council, and let's familiarise ourselves with that and make best use of it. I'm not convinced that we all do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter, do you want to come on this? I shall just comment that I have noticed the huge increase in the amount of cardboard turning up at my local recycling collection service, and I'm feeling very sorry for the people who have to collect it and deal with what can only be described as a mountain that arrives 3 times a week as everybody switches to delivery. Peter Lam.
Thank you. Look, I think in the context of social distancing and trying to deal with COVID, there are clearly, you know, organisations are going to have to try one thing or another. The question, which I guess, or the issue people have got concerns with about this, is about the long-term impact. Is this something that's going to disappear after? We've been through a range of changes with the tip in Crawley. We've had ID required, we've had types of vehicles banned from utilising the sites. We've had an attempt to try and introduce charging for different things, which was later found out to be illegal and had to be dropped. And this just seems to be the latest thing making people harder. And throughout all of this time, we have an increase in fly tipping that's going on, which seems particularly weird given that the local MP seems to be quite happy to criticise the Borough Council about fly tipping at the same time as more and more restrictions are being brought in by the council he used to run about accessing the tip. So I guess the question around all of this is this merely a temporary measure that the council has got to try and deal with the problems here, or is it actually going to be yet another way of trying to control demand than in terms of people using that service? Because people are paying an awful lot for services. They're seeing their council tax bill for West Sussex go up by another 72 quid this year, and at the same time seeing their ability to access things decline. Now, it may well be that it does work for some areas, and it may well be that those areas are fine with it and that this is learned behaviour, but certainly residents don't want to be in a position where they can't access all services simply because they haven't got a phone or they haven't got a website, or because they're going to have to go off to a library in order to access a terminal, which obviously they can't necessarily do when those things are restricted. And people do want to be able to do their DIY, and if they're not able to get rid of it in a responsible manner, yes, a lot of people will still be responsible, but there'll be a lot of people who won't as well, and that cost has to be picked up elsewhere, and it's usually being picked up by a different local authority, which makes it a bit easier. So I have some concerns around this because there's an awful lot of unknowns here, and particularly around restricting people to using it once a week. Because if you're clearing your house out or you're doing a big DIY job, it's not going to wait a week. You know, penalise people, punish people if they don't use their appointments, but limiting them to once a week is a recipe for fly tipping.
Thank you very much. I'm going to let Duncan come in to do an answer for this, and then I'll just move to our last question, as I'm aware we're running out of time. Duncan, come in on this one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lanza has already stressed that this is a trial. There is no predetermined view as to what will be decided after this trial. And we need to remember we're still in a national lockdown, and people have got less things to do, sadly, because they can't go to the shops, they can't do this, that and the other. So we have seen the usage of our household waste recycling centres dramatically rise at the same time as the capability to deal with that waste has been reduced due to social distancing measures. This is about COVID. It's not about any sort of wish to reduce service in any way. Indeed, this is costing the county council more money to have this system. And indeed, they brought forward the opening hours, the summer opening hours. So from last Friday, the increased opening hours. So, for example, Crawley is now 7 days a week, whereas previously in the winter hours it was 6 days a week. And this has been brought in about 3 weeks early from April to enable the demand to help to be met. But the advice remains that you should only be going to the household waste recycling centres if you're unable to safely store that waste at home. We are still in a national lockdown. But what we do know, and what we have seen previously, is that we get a peak in the spring period. And we cannot have a situation where people turn up and there's over a 1 hour queue backing onto the A23, restricting vehicles going into County Oak, affecting those businesses and people who wish to do shopping, as indeed when those shops are open in April, because that's what we will get. And we will end up with the police closing down the site. And that serves absolutely no one. So I fully accept it's not ideal being restricted to once a week. Although I have to say, I've been maybe twice in 6 years. I'm very environmentally conscious, and I don't use a lot of resources. But people do have their need to go. But it just has to be, unfortunately, a little bit more planned, because we want to be able to provide a service to everybody who wants to use it. And we need to space out that demand across the day whilst we have these COVID restrictions. So I do understand people's frustration with it, but at the end of the day, it's a trial. We know it works well elsewhere. Let's see how it works in Crawley. At the end of the day, we do need people do need to be a little bit understanding of how difficult it is to maintain social distancing and keep the staff there safe, and indeed the customers. So it's been brought in through necessity, not in any way seeking to diminish a service. Indeed, it's seeking to make that service available by spreading out the demand across the day, because unfortunately what we see is peak demand and quieter times of the day where hardly anybody's going, where we could make greater use. So this is why it's happening. It's been very, very carefully considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've just got time for one last question, and it would be nice to finish on something that moves us away from some of the challenges created by the pandemic. So we have just had International Women's Day, and I've just been doing a fair amount of work on the impact that COVID-19 has had on women's careers in particular, as there are a number of interesting studies out there, both by McKinsey and Deloitte, about the impact. And John Cooburn from Three Bridges has asked, is the council aware of any moves to celebrate women from Crawley through civic art installations? So if there's anyone that could give me a brief answer to this, I would be very grateful before we get to the end of today's Q&A. Would anybody like to come in and promote this idea? Peter Smith.
Well, I just want to say that John Cooburn himself is leading a project to celebrate Dame Caroline Hazlitt in Three Bridges, and he's doing a great job of it. So, and I know other people that are supporting that. So I encourage him to carry on doing that.
So I will then just give a personal thank you to someone who's supporting that, and please go on and give us some more. I would like to just finish up today by thanking all of our panellists. I think there have been a couple of themes today which I'd like to put out, and it has all been about collaboration and balance. We've looked at the balancing of priorities within a healthcare system, the balancing of priorities between countryside and housing, and importantly, the balance of our economy and sustainability, and trying to work in a collaborative fashion in order to move all of those forward. And everybody here has collaborated on ways in which we can try to take Crawley forward for the benefit of its residents and for the people who live and work here. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. We hope that all of our viewers enjoyed the debate, and the full recording will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a lovely evening, and good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.